Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 156 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods that people have been making and use them to talk about some of the biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a very interesting assortment. We've got a couple cool mammals, we've got a bird, we've got a couple extinct animals as well, and a couple subspecies. So really excited to get stuck into this one. So our first animal is going to be an exhibit animal. This is by Tandoori Leaf. We've got the black flying fox. So we'll have a look at one of these guys flying around or whatever we can get them doing. Look at this cutie. Oh no, he's disappeared. We want to get one where we can get a good look at his face. Well, there's one here. Look at him drinking. We'll use you for an example then, buddy. So the black flying fox, or the black fruit bat, Pteropus alcito is, I believe you say their name. So these guys are a bat in the family Patoridae, so they're a type of fruit bat, and they are among, or some of the largest bats in the world. There he is. So they're among some of the largest bats in the world, but they're not the largest in their genus. But there are larger species bigger than them, but they're one of the biggest. These guys are also native to Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia, and are not considered threatened, but they do face threats, as I'll get into. So in terms of their description, not too different looking from other fruit bats, especially in their genus. They do have short black hair with a corresponding reddish-brown mantle, and a mean forearm length of about 164 millimeters, or 6.4 inches, and a mean weight of about 710 grams, or about 1.5 pounds. And are one of the largest bat species in the world, with a wingspan of over a meter, or 39 inches. Typically, these guys are found in native to Australia. They live in places like New South Wales, Queensland, the Northern Territory, and Western Australia, and Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia, such as islands like Sulawesi and Sumba and West Papua, which is quite cool. So like other species of fruit bats, they do like to roost. And we'll see if we can find one that's actually not flying around so we get a good look. So they do like to roost like this, very typical other fruit bats. They like to reside in these large roosts, sometimes called colonies or camps. They consist of hundreds to tens of thousands of individuals. And they will share these roosts with other species, such as the grey-headed flying fox, the spectacled flying fox, and the little red flying fox. And the places they like to typically roost are in mangroves, paperbark swamps, patches of rainforest, and bamboo forests. And very rarely sometimes in caves and underneath overhangs. So uncommon like other bat species. These guys prefer to hang out in forests. So in terms of reproduction, these guys have a baby once a year. A single young is typically born and is carried by the mother for the first month of its life. And once that month is finished, the baby will be left on the roost while the mother goes out to find food. And the food these guys typically eat, they'll eat pollen and nectar from native eucalyptus, lily pillies, paperbark, and turpentine trees. And where the native foods are scarce, particularly during drought, they'll actually eat a lot of commercial food, such as mangoes and apples. And they've been known to travel up to 50 kilometers a night in search of food. But in residential areas, they will eat cocoa palms, which is a substitute for their native species, which has become more rare. And now accounts for about 30% of their diet, but too much because of the high acidity can be fatal for them, so we've got to be very careful with how much they eat. In terms of its conservation, though, they are not listed as threatened, but they do face a lot of threats. For example, increased loss of foraging and roosting habitat because of habitat destruction and climate change, and also mass die-offs by temperature events. So because climate change is making Australia even hotter, the negative impacts are going to face these species a lot. So actually one study, these animals begin to die once temperatures reach above 40 degrees. And a lot of studies looking into wildlife rehabilitation showed that the most common bat species to come in with heat-related issues. So these guys often, about 46% of wildlife rescues of black flying foxes are due to heat stress, compared to the 18% of grey-headed flying foxes rescues and 8% of little red flying foxes. So it shows that these guys are particularly vulnerable to heat stress. So that's going to be a big issue once Australia gets a bit warmer because of climate change. But also they can be a nuisance in habitat areas because of their roosting and foraging habitats bring them into conflict with humans. They often be killed. In Indonesia they are considered bushmeat, but it's not considered sustainable because it's people just hunting them wild ones. They might not be sustainable. And another reason as well people are worried about them is like disease vectors. So the three zoonotic diseases that most people are worried about is the Australian bat lyssavirus, Hendaya virus, and the Menangle virus. However, only one has had 2 isolated cases, so it's relatively safe, but it is something to worry about because bats are great vectors for disease. And flying foxes have come to the attention of lots of wildlife care and rescue organisations and places like Bat Rescue. They've got a YouTube channel. They will take in a lot of bats and take care of them, which is really awesome. A very high portion of these adults are either sick, injured, abandoned, or orphaned. They can result in getting caught in wires and fences, fruit and improperly erected fruit tree netting, and these can have injuries if they're not resolved quickly. So we need to make sure we take care of these guys because they're quite cool bats. And we do love them. So that was done by Tanuki Leaf. They really did an awesome job with a new species. Then next up, we've got another really, really cool one. Let's see if we can have a look at the Pink Fairy Armadillo done by Tosco DS. So let's see if we can find an adult. It's juvenile. Last time I recorded it was first try adult. There we are. There we go. So here is the Pink Fairy Armadillo. Really, really cool little guy. So their scientific name is Chalaporus tucanus. These are the smallest species of armadillo and were first described by Richard Harlan in 1825. These guys are a small, solitary, desert-adapted animal found only in the desert and scrublands of central Argentina, and they're closely related to the greater fairy armadillo. So in terms of their evolutionary origins, their subfamily is Chanoporidae that only has the 2 species, the greater fairy and the pink fairy armadillo. The greater fairy armadillo is reticulus. These guys are Tucanthus. They're quite similar, and they're believed to have split from other species. They specialize for this lifestyle about 32 to 17 million years ago, and then the 2 species split between 17 to 3 million years ago into the Miocene. But because we haven't got so much in terms of genetic evidence, because they're so elusive, we really don't know a lot of their close evolutionary relationships. In terms of their range and habitat, though, these guys are nocturnal burrowing mammals, endemic to, as I mentioned, the kind of scrubland or dry environments of central Argentina. They have been found south of the Mendocino province, as well as north of Rio Negro and south of Buenos Aires. And this narrow range is very crucial habitat for them because these guys are subterranean, so they're very susceptible to changes in the soil, like heat stress and things like that, temperature and soil quality. In order for them to survive and maintain stability, they must occupy undisturbed places that have sufficient amount of compact sand in hiding places. And this also refers to possible captive conditions due to their desert adapted characteristics, so people trying to keep them in captivity. We'll get into that. So the pink fairy armadillo is considered to be fossorial, so it spends most of its time underground. Generalist, so pretty much lives in, a pretty general animal, does its own thing. Insectivore, so eats a lot of the animals it does eat is larvae and its main food. Ants and larvae are its main food when underground, and while those are its primary sources of food, they've been known to eat worms, snails, various insects as well. Like insects and vertebrates, they will also eat plant leaves and roosts as well. And in captivity, they've been observed eating like watermelon, avocado shells, and avocado flesh, and Missouri insectivore diets, so they can be kept in captivity, luckily. In terms of their description and size, these guys typically reach between 90 to 115 millimeters, or about 3.5 to 4.5 inches, and typically weigh up to about 120 grams. And the smallest living species of armadillo, also the least known species. So you can see as well, they've got a very interesting shell and thermoregulation. So they've been found to benefit and be found to be beneficial for thermoregulation, the fine hair that they have in highly variable temperatures. So the night temperatures can get very low in the desert. So these guys are nocturnal. It needs to conserve heat while being active outside of its burrow. So they're also well known for their quite leathery shells that cover the majority of their back. These guys, the pink fairy, have these characteristics as well, but their shells are much softer and more flexible that allow them to move around, as well. And though the shells are close enough to the body for blood vessels to be seen in the armor, this protective part of the animal is only attached via a thin membrane along the spinal column. And they can curl up like other species of armadillo to protect their vulnerable soft parts, also using that dense white hair that they have to protect themselves. And this armored shell has about 24 bands that allow it to curl up in a ball, and the armor is flattened on the back of the animal so it can actually compress dirt behind itself as it's digging, which is quite cool. And this allows them to prevent tunnel collapses. And lastly, the shell itself is actually very helpful with thermoregulation, as the blood vessels are quite close to the surface, so that means that the animal can retain and lose heat quite efficiently. And like most armadillos, they typically rely on their sense of smell to find prey. And very similar to other species armadillos as well, they do have large claws and on their hind limbs to allow them to, and their front and hind limbs to allow them to dig their burrows in very compact soil. And they're also nicknamed sand swimmers because they're able to burrow through the sand as fast as a fish can swim in the sea, and their claws are relatively large for their size. That hinders their ability to walk on hard surfaces. And although, along with these unique traits, they do have small eyes that are greatly reduced, and they rely quite a lot on touch and hearing to navigate. They also have a very torpedo-shaped body to allow them to reduce drag, and a thick hairless tail that is used for balance and stability while they use their other limbs to dig. So in terms of their threats, these guys are often forced to leave their burrows during heavy storms due to the threats of drowning and the risk of wetting its fur. And the fur is wet. When the fur is wet, the armadillo cannot actually properly thermoregulate or control its body temperature and can die of hypothermia during night hours. So it just gets too cold because these guys are so small. It's very easy for them to lose heat. Once above ground, though, during a rainstorm, they're vulnerable to lots of predators. Domestic dogs have been known to prey on armadillos. These are armadillos. Even then, they've even been preyed upon by wild boars and domestic cats and any kind of animal large enough, around them. So they're very vulnerable when on the surface. They also do not do well in captivity. Their survival rate is so low that many will die during transport when they move to a new area, and those put in captivity typically do not last longer than a few hours or more than 8 days, and not a single specimen has lasted more than 4 years. And despite of this, though, they actually get caught a lot for the illegally in the black market for pets, but they shouldn't be doing that because you're basically just condemning them to die. But it'd be really cool to, for zoos, maybe try and establish pink fairy armadillos. A very cool species to have on display, I think. They're also quite sensitive to changes in climate, habitat loss, pesticide uses, and overhunting. Because they inhabit in temperate and warm regions, cold temperatures can wipe out populations because of their low metabolism, like others in Atherans, and their inability to store fat. And the number of acres converted as well as the farmland increases, the armadillo's burrows not only get ploughed over, but the land is not inhabitable for them. Also, the use of pesticides is highly concerning because they feed on ants, and the ants take the pesticides, and then these guys will kind of bioaccumulate all that pesticides inside them and get them sick. And overhunting is another factor because of many people in the Americans actually hunting these armadillos to eat because they're said to be similar to pork in their taste and texture. But of course, also collecting for the pet trade is not good as well. But in terms of conservation, they are considered least threatened. Then they were moved to data deficient, due to the lack of scientific information on their natural history and population dynamics. With field sightings considered to be rare or less common than before, even though they've always been difficult to observe because of their nocturnal underground lifestyle. Researchers have found these guys are highly susceptible to stress, making attempts to apply any conservation policies, including taking them out of their natural environment, unsuccessful or extremely difficult. Any modification to its environment, temperature, or diet is known to trigger stress responses, which is considered to be a possible reason why they haven't established in captivity. Many armadillos also have died through transportation process from their wild habitat and may have only survived several days in captivity. Overall, there are only 3 reports of captive maintenance of pink fairy armadillos that were considered successful in 1970, 1985, and 2009, reporting individuals that lived at least 30 months, 22 months, and 8 months, respectively. But these guys are luckily found in several protected areas, including the Waikabal National Park, where both national and provisional legislation is in place to protect the species. So as long as the legal stuff's sorted, they just need some extra help. But yeah, really, really cool. I hope you just learn more about them. That's probably the easiest way to figure out how to help them. Just learn more about them. But anyway, that was done by Tosco DS. Next up, we've got the Grey Woolly Monkey by Monsoon. So how can you not love Monsoon's awesome work? So let's see if we can get an adult there. So this is the Grey Woolly Monkey, which is a subspecies. It's also called the Jeffries woolly monkey, called Lathronyx lathrodicaticana. These guys are a subspecies of the common woolly monkey that is found in South America. These guys are found in Bolivia, Brazil, and Peru, and they get their name, the grey woolly monkey, from their grey coat that's quite thick. And their hands, feet, and face are typically dark in colour as well. And they are sadly considered endangered, as we'll get into. But initially they were thought to be a subspecies of the common woolly monkey. They were later called their own species. Lathyrnax carna were known. However, a 2014 study actually lumped them again as a subspecies. So whether they're a subspecies or species has been debated, but most recently they are considered a subspecies of the woolly monkey, or the common woolly monkey. So these guys typically live in montane forests or cloud forests, the type of forest that's under cloud for most of the time of the year. They can be found anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 meters above sea level, and there's a population of woolly monkeys, grey woolly monkeys in Bolivia, that are reported to be found as low as 700 meters above under sea level. And they spend the majority of their time higher than tree tops in search of food, and they can move with large prehensile tails that they can use to hang in bridge gaps and be able to move through the trees rather easily. In terms of their diet, these guys primarily eat fruit, but they will, when fruit is scarce, eat things like young leaves and sometimes seeds, very similar to their relatives. In terms of groups, these guys can live in groups of between 11 to 25 members, with groups being of both mixed ages and sexes. And the group will often move together and show little aggression towards other groups, and will often share the best feeding spots with other groups, so they're not too aggressive. In terms of size, though, males are typically a little bit larger than the females. The male's head to body length is about 46 to 65 centimeters in length, while the female's from 46 to 58. And the length of the tail is between 66 to 68 centimeters in length. And they weigh on average, male weighs on average about 9.5 kilos, while a female weighs on average 7.7 kilos. So yeah, decent sized monkey. Very big monkey. But the main threat these subspecies face, as I mentioned, because they're so endangered, is hunting. They're hunted for both food, because people like to eat them, and also as pets. People like to keep them as pets. The females are often targeted for hunting, as they are shot, and then the offspring are taken and sold as pets. And one story from the Western Amazon actually reported several hunters who killed over 200 woolly monkeys in less than 2 years. That actually led to their local extinction. So that shows how vulnerable some populations can be, which is really sad. And also mining for cassiterite, which is a mineral that's used for tin, has caused both habitat destruction, which obviously destroys the habitat these guys need to live in, and hunting, which has made them endangered. And these guys are they are currently protected in many national parks, and they're also listed as Appendix 2 in the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, and there are luckily a lot of parks naturally where they are protected. So they are luckily in a lot of protected areas, but those declines, not a good thing at all. But yeah, really, really cool animal. How can you not love these guys? So that was another great Monsoon mod. Monsoon always does a wonderful job with these mods. So next up, we've got a bird, one from New Zealand. I always love talking about New Zealand animals. We've got here the yellow-eyed penguin with the hoiho. So the hoiho is their Māori name. So these guys are a species of penguin only found in New Zealand. And they're previously thought to be closely related to the little penguin. They're actually now considered to be more related to the crested penguins, which is interesting, and they are piscivorous. So in terms of their taxonomy, they were first described by Jacques Bernard Hodgem and Honed Jarapod in 1841, and they're the sole species in their genus Megadactylus. As I mentioned, they were first thought to be related to little penguins. Now they're considered to be related to your crested penguins. And DNA actually suggests that these guys split about 15 million years ago. In 2019, the genome was actually published as part of the Penguin Genome Consortium that has been used to resolve the origins and aid conservation for breeding programs for all sorts of different species of penguin. So there's one living subspecies and two extinct subspecies. So the modern yellow-eyed penguin is Megadactylus antipodes, which is the only extant subspecies. It is formerly most abundant in the subantarctic Auckland and Campbell Islands. They have colonized Stewart Island and the south parts of the South Island after the extinction of the Waiata penguin. So the Waiata penguin is another subspecies, was present all across New Zealand and last dated between 1347 and 1529 AD. They indicated they were probably hunted off by Polynesian settlers and also by the dogs and rats they brung, that caused their extinction. They were also originally described as their own species in 2009, but they were reclassified as a subspecies of yellow-eyed penguin in 2019 and 2022, so it's pretty much confirmed that they are just the subspecies of penguin. And then the Chatham Island had Richardidae, or the Richardale's penguin, which was an extinct dwarf subspecies that lived on the Chatham Islands. So the modern ones you all see today are all the subantarctic yellow-eyed penguin, or the Syrian coiho. So they're pretty easy to tell apart from other penguins because of their yellow head. So they have this band of like pale yellow feathers across their face there, and it circles the back of the head. The forehead, crown, and sides are also slated grey with golden yellow, and its eyes, you can see, is quite yellow. And the forehead, neck, and the sides are light brown. And then the chest and body is quite similar to other penguins, the dark top and the light bottom, which is quite interesting. And juvenile birds typically have a grey head with no yellow bands on their eyes, so typically just like a little penguin. They are the largest living penguin species that breed on mainland New Zealand, and the fourth or fifth heaviest penguin going by body mass. So it's in order, it's the emperor, king, gentoo, and then the yellow-eyed penguin. So that tells you the order of the fourth or fifth heaviest. They're probably tied with, a couple other species. So these guys stand about 62 to 79 centimeters, or about 24 to 31 inches tall, and weigh between 3 to 8.5 kilograms, or 6.6 to 18.7 pounds. And the weight does vary throughout the year, with penguins being heaviest just before molting, during which they may lose 3 to 4 kilograms in weight. And males are typically about 5 to 5.345 kilograms, or 12 pounds on average. And then somewhat heavier than females at about 5.13 kilograms, or 11 pounds on average. So they typically get between 3 to 8.5 kilograms. So decently a pretty big penguin. And they may actually be quite long-lived, and some individuals have been reported living up to 30 to 20 years of age, with males generally being longer-lived than females, and leading to a sex ratio of 2 to 1 at the age of about 10 to 12 years old. Yeah, really, really cool. Look at these guys. Mainly, it's probably because of predators as well. Smaller females may be more prosecuted by females. And these guys are mostly silent, but they do have a bray-like call that they use at nest and breeding sites. So until recently, it was assumed that Antipodes was widespread across New Zealand before the arrival of Polynesian settlers, but over genetic analysis assumes that range only expanded up to mainland New Zealand in the past 200 years, where we had the extinct Waiata penguin, which is the subspecies, which was driven to extinction by Polynesian settlers. So these guys were basically like the same. As I mentioned, there are subspecies. Their main difference was just that it was slightly smaller, about 10% smaller, and a little bit of genetic differences. So, but they were basically the version that lived on mainland New Zealand, and then the subantarctic version in the past 200 years has recolonized a lot of the South Island. But today there is two distinct populations. There's the northern populations that's found on the southeastern coast of New Zealand, found around the Banks Peninsula, North Otago to the Otago Peninsula and the Catlins. And then the southern population lives in the subantarctic and in Auckland and Campbell Islands. There's little gene flow between them, but there is some, sometimes colonization. And they're doing much better on those islands. The recent populations have kind of just recently established themselves. So let's have a look at these little babies as we talk about breeding. So, yellow-eyed penguins, whether they are colonial nesters or not, has been an ongoing debate among zoologists. Most Antarctic penguins, live in quite large colonies when they breed. But in contrast, yellow-eyed penguins do not nest within sight of each other. Whether they come to shore in groups of 4 to 6 or more individuals, they can kind of, they try to nest by themselves. However, the consensus among New Zealand penguin workers is that use of habitat kind of determines that rather than where they nest. So it's the use of habitat rather than colony. First breeding occurs about 3 to 4 years of age, and then long-term partnerships are formed. Nest sites are typically selected during August, and then normally 2 eggs are laid in September. The incubation duties lasting about 39 to 51 days are shared by both parents, who spend several days on the nest at a time. For the first 6 weeks after hatching, though, these little chicks are guarded by one parent while the other's out fishing, and then the foraging adult returns at least daily to give the chick food, and then relieve their partner. And after about 6 weeks, both parents go to sea to supply food for their rapidly growing offspring, and then the chicks usually fledge around mid-May, or mid-February, and are totally independent from then on, and the chicks will kind of fledging weights at about 5 to 6 kilograms. So that's when they do quite well. So let's follow one and hope it swims. I want to see one swimming, because how can you not want to see swimming penguins? We'll have to wait till they're finished eating, I guess. You can see how beautiful these penguins are. Nice to have some New Zealand animals in the game, of course. Another great Cakes mod. Really, really awesome. Anyway, carry on. In terms of feeding, these guys are typically eat a lot of fish, specifically demersal species like silver sides, blue cod, red cod, and opal fish. The other species taken are New Zealand blueback sprat and cephalopods such as arrow squid. They will also eat crustaceans, including krill, and also they've been found to be eating a lot of jellyfish, which is very interesting. But breeding penguins typically like to take, though a lot of that evidence suggests that these guys may be going after juvenile fish and fish larvae associated with the jellyfish, but they potentially would eat jellyfish. Let's see if we can find one swimming. Let's have a look at you swimming. I want to see you dive. Look at these cute guys. A very cute penguin. Anyway, breeding penguins usually undertake two kinds of foraging trips. The day trips where they go, leave at dawn, come back in the evening, to kind of come back, and then shorter trips where they will seldom be away from the nest longer than 4 hours. And yellow-eyed penguins are known to be almost exclusive benthic feeders, where they search for prey along the seafloor. And according up to 90% of their dives are benthic dives, so they go down to the seafloor to look for food. And the average dive depths are determined by the water depths within their home range. So they can be deep divers, so they like diving around the seafloor, which is quite cool. Look how cute these guys are. In terms of conservation, though, they are considered the rarest penguin in the world, sadly, or one of the rarest penguins. They are considered endangered by the IUCN, and then they was changed to endangered in 2000. It's estimated as of 2007 the population was about 4,000, and the main threats these guys face are habitat degradation and introduced predators. Like many New Zealand animals, we had introduced rats and cats and stoats and dogs and things like that have hurt the populations, of a lot of animals. The hunts the adults or take their eggs, so that's really hurt their population. And luckily there is a reserve protecting more than 10% of the native population, and they are granted, protection by the US Endangered Species Act, which is quite cool. In terms of threats, though, these guys are... there's also a previously undescribed disease that had killed off 60% of the chicks in spring 2024 in the Otago Peninsula. And this disease is actually linked to an infection of Corian bacterium, which causes diphtheria in humans, and has been described as diphtheritic stomatitis, and the pathogen was identified. But a similar problem affected the short-eyed population, and treatment of the chicks have actually been recorded from quite successful, with 88% of the 41 chicks treated in 2022 surviving, and there have been a lot of chicks, taken into captivity to help, their population to make sure they're alright, and then released out into the wild. And they're also quite common for tourism. There's several mainland habitats that have hides that are easy to see these penguins, where the birds come ashore. There's a number of beaches in Dunedin or Oamaru and the Catlins where you can see them, and they provide hides to view these penguins. However, they cannot be found in zoos, and they will not reproduce in captivity, so you can't find them there. But other facts as well, they are on the side of the $55 note. They are the mascot of the Dunedin City Council Recycling and Waste Management Campaign. That also in 2019 was crowned Bird of the Year, and the first time a seabird has won in its 14-year history at the time, which is quite cool. And we had a bat win it just recently, so really, really interesting. So look at these guys, lovely penguins. Love a yellow-eyed penguin. Alright, so that's another Great Cakes mod. The rest of the mods are all Great Cakes mods, so let's have a look at our next one. So this is a very interesting animal. We're going back into prehistory. We have got the Oxydactylus longiceps. Let me say that. There's a few other species that have been lumped into it, but this is longiceps. These guys are an extinct species of camelid that was only found or endemic to North America. So they lived in the late Oligocene to the middle Miocene, between 28 to 13 million years ago, and existed for approximately 14 million years. So the name from ancient Greek, Oxydactylus, which means basically just sharp finger. So you can see they have very, very long legs and necks that were probably adapted for eating high vegetation like modern giraffes and other, grenouks and things like that. And unlike modern camels, they had hooves rather than soft pads and splayed toes. You can see they've got very much like hooves. They've got the two hooves there. It makes them look very weird compared to modern camelids, but you can see those two hooves going on. But yeah, very interesting as well. We always, just because there isn't much to talk about with this animal, as you can see the long neck, very camelid, very giraffe-like, but actually is a camel. A lot of people think of camels as like an Asian, because camelids, the modern living camelids, you type of camels, and then you have your llamas and alpacas and the guanacos and vicuñas that all live basically South America and Europe and Asia, or Africa and Asia. That's actually a weird distribution, because just until recently, these guys actually evolved in North America, and they only recently left the Americas around like the end of the Miocene to the Pliocene. So the Great American Biotic Interchange, camelids moved into South America that evolved, to become the vicuña and things like that, and the South American like llamas, things like that. And then you had some that went out into Eurasia to become camels. And the camels actually were, until recently, we think of them as Eurasian or Eurafrican, we'll like to say. Well, African, Asian, and South American things. They evolved in North America, and they only went extinct in North America quite recently, only until about 12,000 years ago. The last American camel went extinct, Camelops, went extinct with the extinction of a lot of the great Ice Age megafauna. But yeah, so it's really interesting how we think of distributions today. It's been kind of weird, because like, how did camels get from both to South America and Europe and Africa and Asia? But turns out they evolved in North America and moved out there. They just went extinct here, which is a little bit sad, but very interesting in terms of their history, which is always important. But yeah, really, really cool, and nice to see some extinct species getting some love, as per always. Really, really loves Great Cakes mods. Always is really awesome. Whatever species they make is always just pretty much a banger. And you have a look at the cute little babies. Look at these cute little baby camels. How cute. I love these guys. Anyway, we're going to move on to another extinct animal. We have got the sea mink. Let's have a look at this guy. So this is the sea mink. So the sea mink, or Nagale macrodon, these guys are actually a recently extinct species of mink that lived along the eastern coast of North America, across the Gulf of Maine into the New England seaboard, and they're believed to be closely related to the American mink. And there's actually continuous debate whether these guys were their own species or a subspecies of the American mink. And this main justification of the separate species is a size difference, because these guys are much bigger than American minks. And also they do have distinctions such as reddish fur and larger teeth as well, though we don't really actually know that much about them. The only known remains are bone fragments in Native American shell middens, and the actual size is speculative, so we actually don't know too much about these guys, as we'll get into. So they were first described in 1903, after its extinction, and information regarding their external appearance and habits seem to be speculation and from accounts made by fur traders and Native Americans. So they exhibited behavioral traits quite similar to American minks. They had maintained home ranges, they were polygamous, and had a similar diet, though they were much more marine oriented. They were probably found from the New England coast in the maritime provinces, and probably spread further south during later last glacial period. And conversely, they may have been restricted solely to the Gulf of Maine or just nearby islands. And the largest of the minks, they were more desirable by fur traders, and then they were kind of hunted to extinction between the late 19th and early 20th century. So they were first described as Lutura macrodon, distinct from the American mink, by medical doctor and ornithologist Daniel Whisper Penebs, who actually after became extinct. And then descriptions of skull fragments and things recovered from shell middens in New England. And then most sea mink remains, nearly all of them are skull fragments, but no complete skeleton has really been found. Though, as I mentioned, there has been quite a bit of debate whether they're considered two different species or a subspecies as well. Those who argue that the sea mink was a subspecies consider them to be Mesovision macrodon, and then other paleontologists consider them way too minute to justify this classification of a different species. And then claiming the size range for the largest sea mink was beyond that of American mink, it's different species, so only based on size. Subspecies went back and forth for a little bit. And then they've also suggested this may have been the larger mink specimens outside the range may be sea minks. And there's been because of sexual dimorphism, where the larger ones were males and the smaller ones were females, which is quite interesting as well. And in 2007, study comparing the dental makeup suggested these guys were considered two separate species. Most recent evidence kind of suggests them as a new species. So the most recent taxonomy of these minks, they put them in the new genus Neovision, which includes only the sea mink and the American mink, which was classified in the Mustela genus. And then now their closest relative is the common mink. And a 2021 study found that weasels, and they're called New World weasels and the sea mink, along with 4 other extant species, should be in the new genus Nestogale. So at the moment, they are considered their own species. There has been a bit of debate. And fur traders who hunted it gave the sea mink various names. They're called the water martin, the red otter, or the fisher cat. Probably the first description was given by Sir Humphrey Gilbert in the late 1500s as like a fish, like a greyhound, as they actually had the affinity for the sea, and their body and gait actually looked quite similar to a greyhound. It's also possible that the fisher may have been misidentified as that. And the Abaki Indians actually referred them as mouse besois, or wet things, and were named sea mink because they were found on the coast of fur traders. And then the sea minks were kind of referred to as the wood minks. So these guys were the sea minks, and your typical American minks were the wood minks. So that tells you their difference in habitat. So in terms of their range, as I mentioned, they were a marine mammal that lived from the rocky coast of New England until they were hunted to extinction. Most of the minks remains are unearthed on the coast of Maine, though there has been speculated to be one point inhabited Rhode Island and Connecticut. They were commonly trapped around the Gulf of Maine and even in Nova Scotia. There have been actually reports of unusually large minx furs collected from Nova Scotia regularly, and these guys were dated between, there has been some remains, the bones have been found between 4,300 to 300 years old, about 12 miles from saltwater, or 19 kilometers. And they may have been reached this area by traveling up rivers, or may have been brought up there by Native Americans as well. And the minks have also been, sea mink bones have been observed and unearthed in Canada, so there is quite a range. And very interesting, during the last glacial period, these guys would have extended south and may have even evolved there, and then Maine would have been covered up by glaciers and kind of moved up there as the world, kind of warmed up after the end of the interglacial. And the oldest specimen is only dated to about 5,000 years old. This could be due to rising sea levels, older sea mink remains being submerged underwater. Alternatively, they may have evolved during the last glacial period to have a new niche, so that would kind of justify them as a subspecies. But description, we actually don't know much about them, their fragmentary remains and all that. Main difference is kind of their size and their teeth. That's a bit the way to tell them apart. Then different ecological roles. They typically have a fatter body than the American mink, as reported. They also had a distinctive fishy odor and had fur that was coarser and redder than those of American minks. And even the people that encountered these animals were slightly larger than a fox, had long legs and a tail that was tapered towards the end, similar to a greyhound. And they were the largest of all the minks. So if only as only fragmentary skeletal remains exist, most external measurements are speculative and rely on dental measurements. So some evidence, or some potential talk about their size and things like that. Dimensions was about 91 centimeters, or about 36 inches from head to tail, with a 25 centimeter or 10-inch tail. A possible mounted sea mink skeleton has been found measuring 72 centimeters from head to tail, with a 25.4 centimeter tail. And though a study found it was either a very large American mink or potentially a hybrid, and the specimen had like a coarse fur with reddish tan and likely faded with age, so it's very kind of considered likely this could be a sea mink. So we don't really know, we can't really confirm it. The type specimen was collected by Persis and Federtrue in 1897, which consists a part of a maxilla, palate, and nasal bone, and the right side of the palate. And the specimen was actually larger than the Alaskan mink, and the average distance was the first molar is 28 centimeters in Alaskan mink, where the specimen had 3 centimeters, so it's quite a bit bigger. And these minks, in terms of their body, they were considered to be large and heavily built, with a low sagittal crest and big bodies, big postorbital processes. And their most notable characteristic of the skull was its size, being clearly larger than most other mink. And this large size is believed to be a response in their coastal environment, as the largest extant subspecies is the American mink. The Alaskan mink is a habitat that's quite similar to the Gulf of Maine. And these guys were likely considered restricted to natural habitats, and also because of their large size was due to insular gigantism. And since all of these subspecies, all the members of the subfamily Mustelidae have sexual dimorphism, males were probably a bit larger than the females, and these guys had wider carnassial teeth and blunted carnassial blades that allowed them to eat harder shelled foods than the American minks could have, because they have quite a sharp teeth. So in terms of behavior, these guys are thought to be more like not a truly marine species. They would have been confined to coastal waters and were unusually adapted compared to other members of their group, including being next to otters, the most aquatic members of their kind of taxon. So these guys were basically minks trying to be otters, and they were pretty close. As marine species, they often play a large part in the ecosystems. The sea mink would have been an important intertidal predator, and would have had a similar diet to American mink, believed to be eating things like seabirds, their eggs, and hard-bodied marine invertebrates, though in greater proportion. There's also sea food-oriented diet may have actually increased their size, so they may be eating more protein, getting bigger. And remains of toad scooplins and ocean pout are most commonly found around their dens, and garden-banded snails have also been reported to be part of their diet. According to fur traders, though, they were nocturnal and resided in caves and rock crevices during the day, and they reportedly made a den with 2 entrances where the rocks piled up by the waves. And like other minks, They maintained home ranges, and since the males were larger and required more food, they had larger territories, and likewise the larger side may have allowed them to take larger prey than the females, and they may have allowed them to defend themselves during the mating season. Like other weasels, they were polygynous, with both sexes mating with lots of individuals. Let's look at the babies while we talk about that. Look at these cute little babies. Look at these little cuties. Look at that little guy. How cute is he? I cannot love him. Anyway, and due to the overlap with American minks and sea minks ranges, they probably did hybridize with each other. So in terms of their extinction, they were pursued for their large size because, that makes them more desirable than other minks further inland. And this unregulated fur trade eventually led to their extinction, which was occurred to be between 1860 and 1920. And then they were seldom seen after 1860. The last two reports of a sea mink were recorded in 1880 and in 1894. Although the 84 kills was expected to be large American minks. Fur traders made traps to catch these minks and also pursued them with dogs, although they were really trapped. If the sea mink escaped into a small hole on the rocky ledges, they were dug out by hunters by using shovels and crowbars. And it was out of reach of the hunters. It was shot and then retrieved using an iron rod with a screw on the far end. If they were hiding, they were smoked out or suffocated, and the mink's nocturnal behavior may have been caused by pressure by fur traders that hunted in daylight, which is a little bit sad. Though, since the remains of brain cases found in shell middens are broken, it was assumed that sea minks were also hunted by Native Americans as well, and one study showed that these guys were intact in the bay, and the shell middens implying they were specifically placed there, and often males are more often collected than females, probably just because of their large size. But yeah, sad story of the sea mink, and this is a pretty good reconstruction, I'd say. Looks really, really awesome and nice to see a extinct animal getting some love. And now we have all the species of mink in the game. The American, the Eurasian, and the sea mink. So all the big minks. Really, really awesome. Do love this guy. It's come out wonderfully. But anyway, last mod, also done by Great Cakes Mod. We have got the Syrian brown bear. So let's have a look at these guys. And it's come out rather wonderfully. Oh, I know you're inside each other. Let's move you so we can have a better look at you. Are you guys bugged or are you just messed up? We'll just make sure that you actually can move around. So here's the Syrian brown bear, or Ursus arctocineris, or Ursus arctos arctos. These guys are a medium and endangered subspecies of Eurasian brown bear, found in the Middle East and West Central Asia, particularly around the Caucasus. So these guys have very unusually light brown or straw-coloured hair, and the hair at the withers is longer with a grey-brown base, and is often a different shade from the rest of the body, with some individuals having a dark stripe running along their back, and the lighter colours usually appear in high altitudes, so the lighter they are, the higher they're found. And their legs are commonly darker than the rest of the body, and they're also the only bear known with white claws, which is quite interesting. They're doing an animation. Let's have a look at these little cuties. Oh my gosh. So you can see they've got white claws, which is really interesting. It is rather small for a bear, though. Adult males have skulls measuring average about 30 to 40 centimeters, or about 12 to 16 inches. And the Syrian brown bear weighs just under 1,100 pounds, or just over 1,100 pounds, about 500 kilograms, and weighs about 101 to 140 centimeters, or 40 to 55 inches from nose to tail. Populations in the Caucasus were thought to belong to Ursus arctocineris and overlap with parts of the Eurasian brown bears range, with Eurasian brown bears being larger in size and having darker coats because they lived in darker climates, and darker pigments help absorb heat from the sun. And it was thought that these mixed bears originated during the Holocene, where Syrian bears actually migrated upwards or northwards and interbred with the larger northern bears. However, this hypothesis is considered by experts to be unfounded. And after breeding, these highly predicted mothers give birth in the den and have a litter size of 1 to 3 cubs. So not too different from other bear species. And then we'll have a look at the cute little baby while we talk about them. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, these brown bears occur in the Middle East from Turkey to Turkmenistan, and they're considered actually extremely rare or potentially extirpated from Syria, and have been extirpated from Israel, Jordan, Palestine, and the Sinai Peninsula, and they only survive today in Uzbekistan, Georgia, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Armenia, and Turkmenistan. Now in Syria, there have been reports of brown bear tracks reported in the snow in the anti-Lebanon mountains, and they were also recorded again in the area, so there may be some bears holding out there. In Turkey, though, its important habitat is the Mediterranean belt forest, deciduous and conifer forests of the Black Sea region. the oak and pine forests in northern Turkey and the Black Sea, and the dry forests of eastern Anatolia. And in elevations, their typical habitats is between 500 and 2,700 meters, or between 1,600 and 8,900 feet. In Iran, they are present in the Central Abruzzo Protected Area, south of the Caspian Sea, and the Zagros Mountains. And in these regions, they typically prefer higher altitudes and northern aspects with access to water resources. So in terms of threats, these guys have been threatened by large-scale deforestation. I'll look at you while we talk about that. Threatened by large-scale deforestation, degradation of habitat, and persecution, where they attack beehives and livestock. Local peoples in the Black Sea hunt bears legally for bear fat as well, which is thought to have medicinal value. Though occasionally they are killed during hunts for wild bear using dogs, and wild boar, and poisoned baits and snares can kill things for like red deer, roe deer, wolf, and lynx. Though in 2018 there was actually one killed by Iraqi forces on the Iraqi-Syria border, and in the spring of 2015 3 bears were shot and killed in the northern Iranian county of Safakur, I believe you said that. But very interesting, there is a bit of history with these guys as well. They are mentioned in the Bible. The protectiveness of the mother bear towards her cubs is cited proverbially 3 times in 2 Sam 17:8, Proverbs 17:12, and Hosea, I believe say that, Isaiah 13:8 in the Hebrew Bible. And the Syrian bear is also mentioned 2 times in 2 Kings 2:3-25, mauling 42 young men who were threatening Elijah, which is interesting. And also there was Rotek. So Rotek from 1942 to 1963 was a Syrian brown bear who was purchased by Polish soldiers in Iran during World War II, and he became a company mascot. Initially he got the rank of private to justify his presence in the military camp, and he was actually promoted to corporal, which is quite cool. And actually assisted with soldiers with loading artillery because, being a bear, really strong, he could lift things heavily. But after the war, he was retired and lived in Edinburgh Zoo, where he was a popular and a beloved attraction, and his military service was actually memorized in Scotland and Poland. So he was a bear with a war service, Really, really awesome. So yeah, definitely a big fan of these bears. So yeah, really, really awesome assortment of mods today. These are the Great Cakes. These 4 mods, all done by Great Cakes mods. We also had Monsoon, Tosco DS, and Tanuki Leaf. All did a wonderful job with their mods. So I think this is a great place to finish up today. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.